Okay, thank you very much for joining. What you're looking at, obviously, is the Great Pyramid at Giza, one of three, but actually one of 8 original pyramids. Most academics date the Great Pyramid's construction at 4,500 years ago, but that's clearly impossible. This structure would be very difficult for us in the 21st century to construct. So the concept that a bunch of Egyptian slaves did this is ridiculous. It's composed of 2.5 million multi-ton blocks. And again, according to standard academia, they say it was constructed in 25 years. That would mean the cutting, moving, shaping, and putting into place one multi-ton block every 2 minutes. So just forget about the conventional history that you've heard as regards Egypt. This is a megalithic structure that was likely made 12,000 years ago. Now, the dynastic Egyptians go back approximately 5,000 years. So this structure is likely 7,000 years older than them. The dynastic people simply found this on the Giza Plateau and they adopted it. They never actually did anything with it. And over the course of time, it was, of course, gradually, to some degree, taken apart. Also, independent research is what's important in this day and age, not listening so much to standard academia, because they just keep telling the same boring story over and over again. So independent researchers have figured out many things, including the fact that the limestone that makes up the Great Pyramid was the stone was taken from 3 different quarries, none of them on the Giza Plateau. The quarries are actually closer to Cairo. So each one of these stones had to be moved across the Nile. So that makes it even more complex. And also, it's not a 4-sided structure, it's actually an 8-sided structure. Oops. So most of the casing stone is gone from the Great Pyramid. It was pillaged over the course of time, but we see the inner stones here, and look at the amount of weathering of the stone. That, I've been told by geologists, is much more than a couple or 3,000 years, but many, many thousands of years. And again, we believe the dating of this structure to be 12,000 years old. What civilization? Some people call them the ancient Kemetians because the original name for Egypt is Kemet, which means the Black Land. Was it aliens? I don't know, maybe. Was it Atlanteans? Possibly. So here again, you see the weathered surfaces of the exterior of the Great Pyramid. And again, the weather, like even the wind and sand blowing and eroding the surfaces would take a lot longer than the conventional time period. It's believed in general that the casing stone was removed maybe about 2,000 years ago for the construction of the city of Cairo, which Cairo didn't exist in Egyptian, dynastic Egyptian times. It's a later construction. It's a city of 30 million people now, but in actual dynastic times, it's likely that it didn't even exist. Giza and the area on the other side of the Nile is where ancient Egypt, or most of ancient Egypt, is located. So there are dynastic structures, of course, but then pre-dynastic. This is the flooring outside of the Great Pyramid, and you can see that the stone blocks interlock. Of course, there's been a lot of weathering over time, but some of these blocks of the floor weigh 40, 50 tons possibly. And the average weight of the stones of the Great Pyramid are about 2.5 tons, but there are some, of course, which are much bigger than that. Then there are a series of shafts on the Giza Plateau. This one is actually right next to the Great Pyramid, and it's filled, unfortunately, with garbage now, but in the distant past, I've actually been underground in Giza, under the Giza Plateau, 4 stories below. That was done by special permission. And my guide, Yusuf, who took me there, said there are at least 10 more stories underneath the plateau. So it's almost like, well, it's a series of shafts and tunnels. And the Great Pyramid locks into the Giza Plateau. It doesn't simply sit on top of it. And this is also next to the Great Pyramid. You can see that this is actually basalt stone. And you can see the, oops, sorry about that. So you can see the horizontal cutting marks on the side of this basalt. That is not modern. Basalt is a very hard stone. So the Egyptians had bronze, dynastic Egyptians had bronze tools. That was the hardest metal they had. This had to have been done with something at least like diamond cutting tools. And diamond tools were not invented until the 19th century AD, not the 19th century BC. This again, more of the cutting marks. And what we have been able to figure out too is that the penetration of the tool involved, in this case a straight saw, every motion of the saw penetrated the stone by 3 millimeters. And that is 500 times more efficient as a modern diamond tool. So we're talking very advanced, lost ancient high technology. Not just here on the Giza Plateau, but we'll see many other places that you may not have heard of. Everyone, of course, knows the Great Pyramid and knows Giza, but ancient pre-dynastic Egypt, most of the structures are actually underground. They were built underground on purpose, and it's believed that at least 85% of ancient pre-dynastic Egypt is still underground. It's all been locked off, of course, because this is very inconvenient information for standard Egyptology. But thanks to the internet, thanks to independent research and study, we're able to learn more and more about this very advanced technology that existed long before the time of the pharaohs. And by the way, did you know that the word pharaoh is actually Greek? The original word is Petra, which means the high house. And the high house was the woman. So the ancient pharaohs, at least from the school that I've been studying, were the matriarchal line. Men and women had equal functions. The man, the so-called male pharaoh, was the great protector of his wife and people, but the royal bloodline and title actually was the woman. So Petra is from where we get pharaoh. And here we are at the second pyramid, so-called Khafre, named after the pharaoh, male pharaoh Khafre, but Khafre did not build this pyramid. Again, it was found, damaged. It dates from the same time frame as the Great Pyramid, so it's 12,000 years old. And here you can see some of the casing stone at the bottom. That is granite, and the granite comes from the Aswan Quarry, which is in southern Egypt, so that's somewhere in the nature of at least 500 miles away. Or it could also come from the Sinai Desert, which is hundreds of miles to the east. You see the weathering of the surface, the way that the granite is peeling off. That could be from actually intense heat that struck and damaged the Great Pyramid during this series of cataclysms some 12,000 or 11,700 years ago. And the chisel marks you see are attempts either during dynastic or possibly Greco-Roman times of trying to cut the granite blocks into smaller pieces, but they basically gave up and abandoned that. Now this is also on the Giza Plateau. Again, look at the weathering of this limestone. These blocks are 20 to 40 tons in size. And originally they had covering of granite on the fronts and the backs. And so now all you see is the exposed limestone. And once again, geologists have told me that the weathering of this stone is much more than, say, 2,000 or 3,000 years old. And this is pyramid number 3, the so-called Menkaure pyramid, which is the smaller of the 3. Again, the conventional story, which makes no sense whatsoever, is that Khufu built the first one, the Great Pyramid, and then his son Khafre built the second pyramid, and Menkaure did not have the resources to build one of the same scale, so he made one smaller. But they didn't build any of this. They found them in place, and each one of these was an energetic structure originally. They don't function anymore, but they were built as giant resonators of the Earth's energy. And so they're different shapes and sizes based upon the specific function that they had. And it was like a giant array of, as I said, 7 or 8 great pyramids. You've probably heard of the Bent Pyramid, and you've likely also heard of the Red Pyramid, and there are also other ones. There's a site called Abu Rawash, another one called Abu Sir, and another one called Abu Ghurab, all in the area of the Giza Plateau, because the Giza Plateau goes on for something like 60 to 100 miles. It's much more than just where the so-called Great Pyramids are. So once again, and you see these curious protrusions. Again, this is red granite that was brought all the way from Aswan. And no one really knows what the function of the knobs are. Some say it was to place the stones into position by hooking ropes underneath. It's kind of silly. It probably had to do with the tuning of the structures. Once they were built, in order to resonate properly, it's quite likely that they had to be fine-tuned, and it is possible that the knobs were for that purpose. Then we have these 2 large boxes, which are outside of the Great Museum in Cairo, which is actually being decommissioned because they built the largest museum in the world on the Giza Plateau, which is a logical place to have it. So it's a massive structure that will be finished in 2020. And again, the largest museum in the world. So on the right-hand side, what you have is a sarcophagus. That is for a dead Egyptian person of nobility. You see all of the hieroglyphics on the outside describing the life and times of that person. But notice how rough the construction technique is, very, very crude. And that reflects the fact that the dynastic Egyptians had very crude tools. They had saws, yes, but saws made out of bronze. Bronze is not hard enough to be able to cut granite. And even if you add silica sand as a lubricant or abrasive, you can't cut quartz crystal or quartz stone with quartz stone sand. They would just nullify each other. Now the one on the left-hand side, they admit is older. It's either from the first dynasty or it's from the so-called archaic period. And what archaic means is pre-dynastic. So you can see it's much larger. The surfaces are almost perfectly flat. The lid and the box itself are from one piece of stone. And if you were to feel the interior, it's as smooth on the inside as glass. And you can see reflected in the bottom part of the lid, you can see that glossy shine. So this was clearly made with very advanced technology, and stonemasons who have been asked say this would be a very difficult thing to make even in the 21st century with diamond cutting technology. We also see no evidence of tool marks whatsoever. So whoever made this made it almost perfect. Unfortunately, because it's so ancient, the exterior is badly damaged, and it doesn't help, of course, that it's sitting outside the museum. And it was probably brought from an ancient site called Saqqara. Now, I don't think this was a tomb. I think this was actually, again, like the Great Pyramid and other pyramids, an energetic resonance device. Because if you tap on the side of it, it makes a very distinct sound. It responds, funnily enough, to the sound of Om, which is also the resonance of our planet, several octaves lower, but also the king's chamber resonates to the sound of Om. It's almost deafening if you get 40 people in there making properly the Om sound. So here's another photo of the box. Again, you can see the original surfaces were originally very finely polished, but because it is so ancient, of course, erosion, damage, possibly even vandalism has happened to it. But if you were to take those wooden blocks out, it would more or less hermetically seal. And once again, just a comparison. The box on the left, which is a sarcophagus, 4th dynasty. Box on the right, so-called 1st dynasty, but I think it's pre-dynastic, and I think it's contemporary with the Great Pyramid at being somewhere in the region of 12,000 years old. Now, inside the museum, in a dark corner, because they don't really want you to see it, is a box, a giant box weighing 60 to 80 tons that was never completed. And what happened was we see evidence of 2 circular saws trying to cut the lid of the box off from the bottom. These saws were somewhere in the region of 6 feet in diameter. And we see the tool marks, we see the saw cutting marks, and the fact that the top saw started to move into the box. It wasn't following the straight line that it was supposed to. And so part of the lid snapped off, and they simply abandoned the project. They didn't try to recycle it. They didn't try to find some other function for it. They didn't try to cut it up into pieces. They just left it. So that shows you that they had very advanced technology, and this cutting of stone was so simple for them that they would simply get another block and finish that one. So that's the funny thing, is we find what you would call human error, like saws going off course, drill holes going off course and things like that, which sounds much more like a human proclivity than an alien one, I would think. But again, we don't know who the original builders were, but they were more technologically advanced than we are today. Now, this is the lid of another giant box weighing 60 to 80 tons. Again, you see the straight lines. That is another type of saw. It could even be a type of bandsaw, but you can see it's wavering up and down as it's cutting. That's why I think it was a bandsaw of some sort. And this box, once again, was never completed. We don't know why, but it too is located in the main museum in Cairo. Now, what's this? This is called the schist disc. And it's called the schist disc because most academics believe that it's made out of a type of stone called schist. But in fact, our resident geologist, who we take all over the world with us, Susan Moore, has declared that it's not schist, but it's a metamorphosed kind of sediment or clay material. And she said that it would be very hard, very dense, and very vibrational, very resonant. It obviously looks like it was something that spun, and unfortunately it was found broken. So the museum badly tried to repair it, but the original parts of it are technically almost perfect. And it's also clear that it appears that it fitted onto a shaft of some kind and then spun locally at very high rate of speed. But what was its function? Again, likely resonance of some kind, because the fins on it are not curved or bent, it wasn't meant to push or pull water, but maybe it was meant to set up some kind of vibrational frequency. Some even suggest the right frequency to levitate the stone and move it, because there's no way the giant boxes we've been looking at, or the Great Pyramid stones, etc., were moved by hand. They had to have been moved using some far more sophisticated technique. So here's another view from the top of it. Again, you can see there are three blades on it. You can also see the different shades of color that distinguishes the difference between where it was repaired and original. So the lighter shade of gray is the repair work, the darker shade is original. But the sad thing is that it was found broken at Saqqara. They may have many more of them hiding in the basement or the warehouses of the museum, and the fact that this object is actually on display is quite remarkable, because it's clearly the result of advanced technology, and they put a description on it as being a lotus vase. I don't think so. Any engineer would say that's a machine part. Then we see other objects like this one. You see the perfect circle in the middle on the top. So clearly this was to some degree spun on a lathe. And also you see that it too was found broken. So this also was found in the same location at Saqqara in Egypt, very close to the Giza Plateau. Then we find core drill holes. This is in another one of the giant granite boxes, again weighing in the region of 60 tons, much, much bigger than a coffin for a human being. So, of course, it is quite probable that these giant boxes were used during dynastic times for funerals, because they would be very useful. You would put a series of wooden boxes inside, the pharaoh or the pharaoh's whoever, or noble inside the innermost box. But these core drill holes like this, again, this technology was not developed until the late 19th century AD. You can tell by the patina that whenever this drill was operating, it was a very, very long time ago, and the dynastic people did not have this technology. You need something harder than quartz crystal, because there's a lot of quartz crystal in granite, which is 7 out of 10 on the hardness scale. So you would need something harder, again, likely diamond, or maybe even something more exotic than diamond. Another big box, again, probably recycled and used as a tomb. The hieroglyphics were carved on afterwards, probably at the time that the noble person was being put into the box, or just before that. But the box itself is made of quartzite. Again, quartzite is 7 to 7.5 in hardness. So this would require at least diamond level saw and drill technology to make. So it was found by the dynastic people and reused. We see the same thing in other countries, like in Peru. The megalithic structures were not built by the Inca culture. The Inca found those structures, used them, and adopted them. And then here, this is called a pyramidon. And maybe it was on top of one of the pyramids. Maybe it wasn't. Of course, the capstone of the Great Pyramid is missing. This is actually too small to be it. But once again, the hieroglyphics on the surface were carved during dynastic times, but the stone itself was shaped thousands of years before. Again, you can see damage to the surfaces. That's what we see in basically everything which is pre-dynastic. We see damage. I don't think that it was simply vandalism. I think it was all as a result of ancient cataclysmic activity in the distant past. So this is one of 3 that I believe are in the Cairo Museum. But the Cairo Museum is full of artifacts. They have something like 150,000 of them on display. So how many million artifacts do they have still hiding in warehouses, some of them being so bizarre in nature that putting them on display would shatter Egyptology as we know it. And now we're at the Osirion, which is located at Abydos in the middle of Egypt, close to the Nile. Almost all of the megalithic structures are found very close to the Nile. And so it was built on purpose underground. The granite stone in the background, those giant columns and pillars weighing 40 to 60 tons, again, were brought from, likely from Aswan in the very far south, which is hundreds of miles away, or from the Sinai Desert, which is hundreds of miles away. And then in the foreground, you see that very large stone. That is a piece of quartzite once again. And if you look about 1/5 of the way down, you can see a horizontal line. That is the longest saw mark that I have seen so far in Egypt. It's about 12 to 14 feet long. And that's a very large saw would have to be involved. Again, using at a bare minimum diamond level technology. And quartzite is from a quarry near Cairo. So again, that's a distance of at least 400 miles, I believe. And then the wall on the left-hand side, you can see is somewhat polygonal. That's also made of quartzite. And that's the interesting thing about the ancient sites in Egypt. All of the stone that was used during the megalithic pre-dynastic times is very high in quartz crystal. And quartz, of course, is very good in terms of its piezoelectric qualities and vibrational qualities and even acoustic qualities. So the stone was specifically selected. It wasn't simply that they would take it from any quarry. We find the same thing in Peru and other ancient mysterious locations in different parts of the planet. But the main focus for me are Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, Easter Island, Peru, and Bolivia. By the way, independent research has done radiocarbon testing of organic material at Stonehenge, and that independent testing dates Stonehenge at 12,000 years old. So this 12,000 year thing keeps recurring and recurring and recurring. The standard dating of Stonehenge is 4,500 years, making it contemporary with the Great Pyramid, but no. And also originally, Stonehenge was 2 perfect circles. It was rebuilt during the 20th century based on guesswork. And over the course of hundreds, if not thousands of years, the stones of Stonehenge were broken up and used by farmers and other people. So originally Stonehenge was 2 perfect circles, and the stone was, again, like a quartzite and incredibly highly polished. This is also at the Osirion. It's actually it's a series of underground tunnels that may have originally carried water. So a pragmatic function to the Osirion. There is one theory that it was almost like an organic water pump. That's why it was buried or built underground, that the water of the Nile, especially during the time of the Nile floods, would fill the chamber, the main chamber of the Osirion, and it would naturally pump its way up these 2 ramps. There's one on the left, one on the right, gradual slope going up, because there's almost no water for agriculture in this area. So that's one of the theories. It was not built as a cemetery, as most academics believe. So this too is at the Osirion. Again, you can see that it was built underground. If you look higher up, you see modern construction and also dynastic period work, which is much, much cruder. The fact that these giant stones are broken, part of it is the result of ancient cataclysmic activity, and other is attempts at quarrying the stone during dynastic and later times, but it was found in modern times. It was found in the 19th century, completely buried. They had to actually dig down in order to find it and uncover it. So that probably would have been thousands upon thousands of years of sand buildup. This again is a pre-dynastic structure. You can still see that there's water in the bottom a little bit. So almost everything that is pre-dynastic was pragmatic in function, not necessarily spiritual, but during dynastic times, the dynastic people were, of course, a very religious, spiritual people. So they would adopt these ancient sites and use them for spiritual purposes, not the original function. And you find the same thing in places like Peru, where the Inca adopted ancient structures and made them sacred sites of worship, etc., like sun temples and moon temples and things of that nature. So just another view, once again, of the Osirion. You can see the giant blocks, the almost puffy blocks in the background of the quartzite, and then the dynastic and later much, much cruder work above. And that's what you find, is you find the oldest work tends to be at the lowest level, and then the upper work is cruder. So rather than civilizations going from being primitive and then more and more sophisticated over time, you have incredibly advanced technology and then a sudden drop off. And that tells you quite obviously that the original builders disappeared, whether they left on purpose or whether they died out, we don't know. But then these sites were left abandoned for thousands upon thousands of years, and then found by the dynastic people who reutilized them to some degree. So now we are at Karnak. And Karnak is one of the largest temple complexes in the world. It takes hours upon hours upon hours to walk through it. And again, what we find at Karnak is we find two building techniques and two time periods. The inner core is the ancient megalithic part, and then everything outside of the inner core is dynastic Egyptian. All of the dynastic Egyptian work was made using sandstone and limestone, which are relatively easy stones to work, and the quarries are relatively close. But all of the pre-dynastic work is in granite and basalt and a type of very hard alabaster. And if you look very carefully on the left-hand side in the foreground, you see three obelisks, and then go to the right and you'll see two more. Go to the right and you'll see two more. So they're lined up in a series. They weren't simply put in different places because the people decided that they wanted to put them in some kind of random order. But the obelisks themselves were made during pre-dynastic times. Each one is made of granite from Aswan. Some of them weigh hundreds of tons. There's one at Luxor that I believe is 450 tons. And so I believe the function of the obelisks were as, again, resonant structures. I think they were receivers of energy. The energy from the Great Pyramids, when they were functioning, would radiate out, and then the obelisks would be the receptors. And so it would be like an ancient Wi-Fi system. Not a system for sending electricity, but a very specific tone of energy. And that's why they were lined up in a line like this. And so the dynastic people find them, and then they decide to carve hieroglyphs on them and reuse them as ways of telling stories or that sort of thing. But there is no way that the dynastic Egyptians made these obelisks. So Karnak is one of the most special sites. Also, the so-called Holy of Holies, which is this east-west path, is 20 degrees off east and west. And what that's telling us is that 12,000 years ago, again, there was a major cataclysmic event that happened in Egypt, and the axis of the Earth shifted. So originally 12,000 years ago, it was perfectly vertical, our planet was, and then likely a series of cataclysmic events happened, causing the Earth to tilt, or actually bend, and that would cause the whole orientation of the structure or the ancient site to move by somewhere around 20 degrees. So any culture that's anything knows how to line things up perfectly north, south, east, and west. It's not difficult because you use the equinoxes and the solstices to do that. So the fact that these sites are, some of these sites are 20 degrees off indicates that they were originally constructed prior to the Earth's axis shifting. And so this is where we are at Karnak itself. This is walking down through the center core, which is the Holy of Holies. On the left-hand side, you see one of the obelisks, and on the right-hand side, another obelisk. And you can see that the damage to the obelisk on the right is in the lower section, not the upper section. The upper area is actually technically in very good shape. But the lower area, especially the lower 50 feet, is damaged. And this works with the theory of Dr. Robert Schoch that 12,000 years ago, plasma ejection from the sun struck different locations on the planet, very high heat, blasting the surface of the stone off. And so all along this Holy of Holies, on the left side and on the right side, we see heat damage, minimum 2,000 degrees Celsius. And so Robert Schoch believes that it was plasma outbursts of the sun that were part of the cataclysmic events that damaged ancient sites like this. And a temperature of 2,000 plus degrees Celsius would vaporize any organic life living there. So all of the people, all the plants, all the animals would be vaporized. The soil would be made sterile. And so nothing could grow in these areas for likely at least 1,000, if not several thousands of years. So the sites were built, destroyed, abandoned, rediscovered, reused. And here, this is also in the same area at Karnak. You see that perfectly vertical line, that is a saw cut. Once again, it's a saw cut in hard granite, and so that would require diamond level technology. There's no way that that saw mark was done in modern times because these are very special places to Egypt and of course to the world in general. So we see lots of fascinating evidence of ancient lost high technology from pre-dynastic times. The hieroglyphs and other surface carvings that you can see, that was all added during dynastic times. And again, the stone came from Aswan, that's somewhere in the region of 400 miles away. Now we start to see drill holes. If you look at the center of the stone in the center of the picture, you can see that that was a tube drill, and a tube drill about that big. That would be industrial in nature. A drill to power something of that diameter would be, I would think, in the region of at least 100, if not several hundred horsepower. The dynastic people, of course, did not have electricity as far as we know, and they did not have perfectly round drill technology. Their hardest material, once again, was copper or bronze. And so copper and bronze cannot cut hard stone like this. So we're looking once again at obvious ancient lost high technology, and the feed rate, or the boring rate of penetrating that stone, is estimated by engineers that I've been here with to be 500 times more efficient than a 21st century tube drill. So again, we're looking at technology beyond our present day capacity. And it's not like there are, say, 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 of these drill holes. They're all different shapes and sizes. This is the largest that we've found so far, but there are hundreds of these that I've seen here at Karnak, and also other locations such as Abu Sir and Abu Ghurab, which are located closer to the Giza Plateau. Here at Karnak, we're somewhere in the middle. We're in the area of Thebes, which was the ancient capital most of the time for the dynastic people, up until their fall at the hands of the Romans, or the Greeks, the Romans, and then the Islamic period. So this is a close-up of what this tube drill looks like. Again, you can see it's very large, and the thickness of the drill bit itself, of the wall, is about like that. And for the scale of what this tube drill would be, that is much, much thinner than what a modern tube drill is, because in a modern tube drill, you have the diamond encrusted material on the front of the drill and on the back, or the inside and the outside. And so a modern drill of this scale would be approximately that thick. But because we can see where the stone is broken off on the left-hand side, the wall of this is about like that. So the tube drill itself would have been made of a technology of material more advanced than what we have to this very day. Once again, you see this heat damage. It's like the stone, the surface was blasted off. And also the carving. The carving's very simple. On the front, or actually the left-hand side, you can see hieroglyphics. Those were added during dynastic times, but the original flower shapes are technically almost perfect. And I believe that that once again was done in probably pre-dynastic times. But it's the very strange weathering of the stone, which is very curious. When you strike granite with high heat, it basically turns the stone, or it pulverizes the stone on the surface like this. And also you can see the discoloration of the surface. Once again, this indicates very high heat, and it's quite probable that the damage came from the east at sunrise. So this solar flare or plasma struck this location in Egypt at sunrise about 12,000 years ago, went straight through the Holy of Holies. If it was a vibrational series of structures at that time, then obviously the function, it would have turned itself off, because the damage would have done that to it. And so it's most probable that all of the megalithic structures, if they were vibrational and resonant in function, utilizing possibly the Earth's natural vibrational energy, they automatically all turned off at the same time. But there still is enough slight resonance in these areas, and of course the ominous nature or amazing nature of the stonework itself, that's why the dynastic Egyptians 5,000 years ago, when they entered Egypt and saw these huge damaged structures, that they obviously turned these into their own sacred sites, because they were in awe of what they found. And that's, of course, also the case of what we find in Peru. At locations such as Machu Picchu, the central core of Machu Picchu is megalithic in nature. The Inca found Machu Picchu probably 600 or 700 years ago, and they were in awe of the megalithic work. And so they decided to adopt the site and then turn it into a major center and a major place of worship and sacredness. You see this over and over again. An ancient site is found. The people we know of, such as the dynastic people or the Inca, were in awe of what they found, and then they would obviously reconstruct at the same location with very inferior technology. We also see the same thing at Baalbek in Lebanon. Most academics believe that that's a Roman period construction, but it's very clear that the Romans found that as a giant megalithic series of structures damaged by cataclysm. So they adopted the site and then they turned it into a sacred space. And we also find that at Petra in Jordan. Most of you will be acquainted with the so-called treasury at Petra, which is a cut rock surface that was famous from one of the Indiana Jones films. And most people go to Petra and they look at the treasury, then they turn around and leave. They don't realize that Petra is 7 miles or 12 kilometers long, non-stop. I was there 2 years ago, and it took us 8 hours to walk to the end of Petra and back again. Standard academia says that the so-called Nabatean Arab people built Petra, but there's no way, because once again we find machine marks in multitude at Petra. The stone, I've been told by our geologist, is not sandstone, but it's actually quartzite. So again, you're looking at more or less diamond level technology to do the shaping and cutting. And there are at least 5 chambers at Petra cut into the bedrock itself. And the amount of material removed from each of those chambers to form the chambers is 300,000 cubic feet of material. So we're not talking local nomadic people finding Petra and building it. What we do know is that these nomadic people found Petra in ruins. Again, we see cataclysmic damage at Petra. They adopt the site, they make it sacred, and they make it their home.